I'm not going to pretend in any shape or way that I have much historical familiarity with the dynamic that is taking place in Ukraine. I'm not going to pontificate on it too much. Putin, as of I think yesterday, maybe I guess actually early this morning, our time, ruled out war with Ukraine, I should say. And I guess what he's referring to is beyond Crimea. But apparently, Michael is taking some grief for having someone on the program yesterday who was not as pro-Putin as some would like. Look, there is an argument that because of the overwhelming Russian-speaking population in Crimea, because Crimea was a special circumstance in that Khrushchev basically gave over Crimea, and historically speaking,
it's kind of an apology for some of the more intense Stalinist crimes, like exporting all of the Tartars to Uzbek or Kazakhstan. Yeah.
Right. And so one could make the case that there's some type of special responsibility and relationship with Crimea. And after Yanukovych was tossed out, was democratically elected. He also was incredibly corrupt. Nevertheless, there are, in a democratically elected situation, there are supposedly democratic means in which to remove someone like that from power. The moment after he was deposed, the parliament basically passed a law saying that Russia is no longer a legitimate language to be spoken in Crimea. That law was vetoed. Nevertheless, it certainly did not augur well for the rights of the vast majority of people in Crimea who identified more closely with Russian ethnicity. So look, Putin claims that he's not going to go any further than Crimea. He also claims that there were no Russian soldiers in Crimea. I didn't see his quote was something to the effect like, I didn't see the insignias on there. I mean, so, take it for what it's worth. There has been an announcement that the Crimean referendum on independence, which was previously scheduled, will be postponed. But that was probably done in conjunction with some consultation of Russian authorities, Russian officials, I should say, which is arguably a positive sign that there's not some unilateral cancellation of those and that may go forward. Crimean independence is probably the best case scenario in terms of I guess, short-circuiting this crisis. There's also a legitimate argument that the EU and the U.S. did too much to sort of stoke these protests as an attempt to realign Crimea with the EU. And so there's all sorts of cross currents here. And the argument, the one argument that seems to me to be, sort of pathetic is this notion of President Obama's not macho enough. Of all the cross currents that are involved in this, one thing is clear, and that is there is no overriding geopolitical interest of the United States in this. There is obviously a strong interest in regards to the EU. There is also, to be fair, a 1993 or 96, I think it was, treaty that the United States was part of that would ensure the sovereign integrity of former, I guess, republics within the USSR, of which the United States is a signatory. Clearly, the Russians have violated that treaty. Ukraine obviously borders a bunch of NATO states and EU states. All that said, this is primarily of more geopolitical interest to Europe and the EU, which gets a lot of its energy from there. There's far more that they can do in this instance in terms of cutting off travel to the EU by the Russian oligarchs, freezing bank accounts there, which would put a lot more pressure on Putin. Obviously, the United States can do things like say, you're not part of the G8 anymore. You're not going to be, or we're going to boycott the G8 talks coming up in Sochi, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, this is not in the top tier of U.S. geopolitical interests.